Hello everybody, Daniel Evans here again, and we're going to spend some time in our last module on corporate strategy looking at M&As and the use of strategic alliances by organizations. We'll dive into the benefits of mergers and acquisitions, understand the difference between mergers and acquisitions, and then we'll also look at strategic alliances as a way to develop the organization's strategy. So let's take a quick look at these different options that are available to us. So we've looked a lot at business strategy and corporate strategy, and we know that there are strategies to diversify, to internationalize, to be innovative, and these can all be achieved through various different means, including, for example, organic development of the organization where it just grows. It can be achieved through a merger and acquisition. And it can also be achieved through strategic alliances. And these are the three different ways that we can go about these different types of growth activities or developmental activities in the organization. Let's take a look at these three different ways to achieve the various strategic goals that we've put into place. Let's first talk about some basics. I want to give you a general idea of what we're going to be looking at. And a general graphical presentation. So, and again, bear with me, these are very simplistic and simple ways to view very complex issues. First off, a merger. A merger basically is when we're taking two organizations and we're combining them into one. Now, the finality is the combination of these two organizations. And in this diagram, it's neither blue nor gray, and it may be more blue or more gray as a function of the power structure in the organization, as a structure of which part of the merger is stronger financially. In any case, the objective is to merge them together. And a pretty good example of this would be Air France-KLM Group, where two airlines came together and merged their activities. So an acquisition is a little bit different. In an acquisition, we've got a situation where we have an organization and typically a smaller organization. And one of these will literally, the larger one typically, will acquire the smaller one. If it could be a reverse acquisition, in the trend would be the other way, but normally it's the large organization that acquires a small organization. And the smaller organization is integrated within the larger organization. Now, sometimes mergers are actually also acquisitions, where one company will acquire legally the other company. A good example of an acquisition is Apple's acquisition of the software Shazam, and that now is a part of Apple Corporation. Another option we've got in front of us is an alliance. And alliances can take two basic forms. One would be maybe a joint venture alliance, where we have two organizations and they combine resources to create a third entity, which you see here. A good example of that would be Hulu, which is a video streaming service that was created by two corporations, the Disney Corporation and NBC Comcast. 2/3 owned by Disney, 1/3 owned by NBC Comcast. And so the original organizations remain, except this new organization is created. And we'll see later on that JVs are often sometimes a way of entry into a marketplace. But we also, and what's important here is there's a share of capital, right? Both of these companies own part of this third entity. But we can have an alliance without capital, or non-equity alliance. And this is when two organizations combine forces, collaborate, and create some sort of, typically an offer, usually market side offer, that provides value, unique value for customers. Two examples that I can come up with very quickly here would be the Star Alliance, which is an alliance of airline companies that offer its customers code share benefits, business lounges, things like that, so you can accumulate miles across the different airlines. So there's they're creating a new offer by working together, or the alliance between, for example, Starbucks and Barnes and Nobles. Barnes and Nobles is a large book chain in the United States, and this alliance allows them to serve Starbucks coffee inside of the book selling stores. So let's move on. So the first choice that we had in our listing was, well, we can just grow by ourselves. So organic development is the default method for pursuing a strategy. It's basically doing it yourself. This is where a strategy is pursued by building on and developing an organization's own capabilities. There are 5 principal advantages to doing organic development. The first would be knowledge and learning. By using the organization's existing capabilities to pursue a new strategy, it can enhance its learning and its knowledge in the organization, and this is a true benefit. Secondly, the advantage of this would be that it can spread its investment over time. Acquisitions typically require an immediate upfront payment, for example, for the target company, whereas organic development allows spreading of this investment over a large period of time. It also makes it easier to reverse out and adjust if things don't go well, which is the exact opposite of an acquisition. It's hard to get out if things don't go very well. The third advantage of organic development, would be that there's no availability constraints. Organic development has the advantage of not being dependent on availability of an acquisition target. I mean, if you want to acquire a company, if you want to grow through acquisition, you have to find the partner. And here we're not dependent upon that. We have no availability constraint. Fourth, question of strategic independence. An organization does not need to make the same compromises as it might be necessary if it made an alliance or with a partner organization. We are very independent. We do what we want. We don't have to give in or give up something with organic growth. And the fifth principal advantage is cultural management. Organic development allows new activities to be created in the existing cultural environment, and there's no risk of cultural clash when we're doing organic development. However, often organizations have to go beyond their own internal capabilities and look externally for methods to pursue their strategies. And so now we'll look at some of those ways to do it, and in particular we'll take a first look at mergers and acquisitions. So M&A are probably a quick way to achieve some big strategic objective. However, they can lead to big failures as well. Many mergers and acquisitions have failed over time. Very few or small, less than a majority will survive in mergers and acquisitions. And we'll see that a little bit later on. The first of this is an acquisition, and we already mentioned this is basically achieved by purchasing a majority of shares in the target company. Now, most acquisitions are friendly. So in the case of Apple and Shazam, this was a friendly purchase of Shazam, but sometimes acquisitions can be hostile or a hostile takeover, where the target management is refusing the offer of the acquiring company. In this case, the acquiring company will appeal directly to the shareholders and try to buy the shares from the different shareholders. A good example of this would be Kraft Foods that made a hostile takeover bid for Cadbury chocolates in the UK. And this was an extremely hostile takeover. Other hostile takeovers exist, and sometimes governments will get involved and stop the hostile takeover from occurring. In general, as I mentioned, the acquiring company is typically larger than the company being acquired. That's what we often see in acquisitions. Now, a merger, as I mentioned in the diagram originally, is the combination of two previously separate organizations in order to form one new company. And And mergers have their own cycle, and we'll see that the merging is popular and is not popular at certain times. And this is something you have to be very, very aware of. Unlike acquisitions, merger partners are often of similar size, with expectations of broadly equal status as well post-merger. So we expect things to be about where they are, which is not like an acquisition when we know that the larger firm will dominate the situation. And as I mentioned before, M&As go through cycles. These are basically linked to changes in the economy, and they can be influenced by regulations and laws and availability of targets and availability of finance and a lot of things. One thing you need to be careful of as a manager is not to get too involved in the merger and acquisition hype. We can see that there's growing phases for M&A activity, and during these high cycles, what can happen is that targets can be overbid. We can start saying, oh, I got to buy a company. This is real popular. I've got to do it. Somebody else is going to grab it, so I've got to buy it now. And so prices are sometimes bid up. So be very, very aware of that as a manager if you're ever involved with an M&A activity, that you may be caught up in this hype period where, in fact, in many cases, companies are overpriced in terms of acquisition activities. So why merge? Let's take a look at some of the strategic motives to undertake a merge with another company. And the first of these motives is strategic, to essentially improve our competitive advantage. First, we can extend our reach. Basically, the M&A can be used to extend the reach of the new firm in terms of geography, products, or markets. This is a pretty basic way to get into new markets and to develop and offer new products. Secondly, it can be used to consolidate. An M&A can be used to consolidate competitors in an industry, where we bring together competitors to achieve benefits collaboratively. What this does is it increases power in the market. It can also increase power over not only rivals but suppliers and distributors. It can increase efficiency, and it allows us to have greater scale of operations to, as I mentioned, to essentially have scale economies, but also to negotiate inputs or with distributors. And the last strategic element would be our capabilities. High-tech companies such as Cisco and Microsoft look at acquisitions of entrepreneurial technology companies as part of their R&D efforts. We spoke about innovation in previous chapters, and we saw that we can actually acquire knowledge, and we can actually acquire competence through an M&A activity. And so this allows us to develop new capabilities. The second block of strategic motives for undertaking M&A activities are the issues of finance and optimal use of financial resources. Financial efficiency is one. An acquirer with a strong balance sheet, for example, if somebody's got a lot of cash, can actually improve the indebted target company's financial performance because they have a weak balance sheet. That's one potential benefit financially. Secondly, in terms of tax efficiency, sometimes there are tax advantages to bring together two companies in terms of the tax laws from different countries, tax regimes, and you may be able to transfer activities from one to the other to take advantage of tax rules. And lastly, asset stripping or unbundling. Some companies are very good at spotting other companies' underlying assets that it may be worth more than the price of the company that's being paid as a whole. And so what we'll do is we'll go in, we'll purchase a company, and then we'll unbundle it and sell off the different assets for a higher price than what we paid for the entire organization. And lastly, there are some managerial motives and incentives for doing M&A activities. The managerial incentives can be very personal and self-interest driven by the manager. One may be of personal ambition. There may be financial incentives involved. The person managing the M&A could have a lot of media attention, can improve their personal reputation. So there's a lot of individual benefits of managing and being a manager of a company during an M&A activity. And also there are bandwagon effects where we feel pressure from shareholders, we feel pressure from the organization to undertake a merger or acquisition. We feel that everybody else is doing it, why not me? And if I don't do it like everybody else, then I'll be seen as a bad manager or a bad business owner. Overall, there are many good and many bad reasons to undertake a merger or acquisition. The general consensus remains that the average performance of deals is unimpressive, and basically about half will fail. But overall, make sure you undertake an M&A for the right reason. So let's take a look at the M&A process. The M&A process basically is broken down to 3 key steps: choosing your target, negotiating the deal, and then integrating. And obviously, these first 2 stages include what we often refer to as due diligence, when we're investigating the value of the company, or we're making sure everything's good, that they're not cheating on the numbers, etc. After we've gone through negotiations, the ownership changes hands, and then we manage the post-merger integration phase. And what's very interesting is that it's this integration stage that typically is where things go wrong, because we didn't probably identify potential reasons for post-merger integration failure, like, for example, organizational culture. So let's take a look at this M&A process a little bit more in detail. So when choosing a target, there are 2 main criteria to consider. The first is called strategic fit, and strategic fit looks at to what extent the target that we've identified offers us the opportunity to achieve the strategy, why we undertook an M&A. So this is typically presented as, for example, synergistic strategies or synergistic benefits. We're going to say, oh, we're going to acquire this company. It's providing us with certain benefits. And we got to make sure that they're there. Okay. The challenge is that we often overestimate positive synergies. As we've mentioned in other videos, positive synergies are very, very difficult to manage. They're difficult to create and difficult to manage. And we tend to underestimate sources of negative synergies. If we're merging with a company or acquiring a company, we may have to modify our business model. And that's a big change. And we may have cultural issues to be modified. And if we don't do it well, we'll have negative synergies. So strategic fit is the first element. The second element is organizational fit. And this refers to the match between managerial practices, cultural practices, the staff characteristics between the firms that are merging, or between the various acquisitions. Large cultural, language, or other differences within the organization can create big problems for integration later down the road. And so you really want to understand and measure organizational fit very, 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 very well. And as I've mentioned up here, these 2 elements here, strategic fit and organizational fit, are key components of due diligence, this structured investigation of the target company that happens before we close the deal. Both of these elements, strategic and organizational fit, can be used then as a way to filter out or filter in potential targets for M&A. And again, special attention is often made on organizational fit. So the second stage would be negotiation. So we've gone into our analysis, we've assessed the fit of the organization. Now we can start negotiating. And so bear in mind that negotiation is critical, and it can break a deal down. We can actually find a good partner, and if negotiation doesn't go well, it can destroy a potential deal. Be wary that the price of acquisition is determined through one of many valuation techniques. There are many out there, and sometimes one technique will challenge another. That's obvious. So you want to make sure you're properly assessing the value of the company you're acquiring. And also note that the price is often increased to include a premium for control. This is an additional amount that you have to pay to win control compared to the ordinary valuation of the target. And this can be upwards of 30% of the market value of a company, depending upon the situation in the financial markets. Be careful also of overpaying in negotiations, and then cutting back on critical investments. And this is what's called the winner's curse. If you win in negotiations, you bid up maybe the price, you pay a lot for the acquired company, and then find yourself in a situation where, oh my God, we've spent all this money, now we have to save money. And so you end up decreasing investments in the acquired firm later on, and suddenly you're wondering, well, why did I acquire this firm? We acquired it for the benefits, but we're destroying the benefits by removing investments later on because we overpaid. So be very, very careful of not to fall in this trap of the winner's curse. And lastly, we get to the question of value extraction. And value extraction depends on integration. How do we get value from our merger? So the ability to extract value from an acquisition depends on how it is integrated, obviously. And integration is frequently challenged and is very difficult because, as I've mentioned, because of questions of organizational fit. This is typically where things do go wrong. Poor integration can cause acquisitions to fail. So you've gone through it, you've bought the company, and then you start integrating, and suddenly it all falls apart. And that's not cool, to be blunt. There are two criteria we use when analyzing and undertaking integration. The first being that of strategic interdependence. To what extent is there a need for the transfer or sharing of capabilities? Do we need to share capabilities or not in this acquisition process, for example? There's a presumption that significant transfer or sharing through tight integration can enable the creation of value from the acquisition. And is this the case? Do we need to transfer or share capabilities or not? And the second is a question of organizational autonomy. And sometimes where an acquired firm has a very distinct culture, integration may be problematic, and we may want to maintain a certain high degree of autonomy in the acquired organization, and maybe do that and decrease autonomy slowly over time, allowing us to learn from the other organization's culture. So if we were to look at different integration strategies, how we go about integration, we can look at these on two axes. We can look at this need for autonomy on one axis, and we can look at the need to transfer knowledge. How important is knowledge transfer when we from the acquired organization? And there's basically 3 or 4 different strategies. In the case when knowledge transfer or the need for knowledge transfer is high, but the acquired firm's need for autonomy is low, we'll basically practice absorption. So the acquired firm is absorbed into the acquiring firm. Strategic interdependence in this case is necessary. We can't keep them independent. We will adapt the structure to the needs of the new owners, and we have to do this relatively quickly. And this may actually require also changing the acquired firm's culture. But this is the first choice where there's high level of strategic interdependence that is required, and there's little need for organizational autonomy. At the opposite of this would be a situation where we have a high degree of autonomy that's required of the acquired firm, and we don't really need to learn from the acquired firm. The acquiring firm doesn't need to undertake any knowledge transfer. The acquired firm in this case is probably well run, but it's not very compatible with the acquirer. This is typical of conglomerate deals. We'll preserve them as they are, and we'll request very few changes be made. The third strategy is that of symbiosis. Symbiosis is typical in, for example, the merging of professional services or acquisition of professional services, where we can have high levels of creativity. In this case, we want autonomy. We would like to have autonomy of the acquired organization, but we also need to learn from the organization. So what we're going to try to do is learn the best from each other, and to avoid issues of autonomy, we'll retain the incumbent management at start and then move that management over time. But initially, we'll maintain some degree of autonomy. We'll learn from each other and then move away from that over time. But we need to share practices to benefit from this acquisition. And the last one, as you've seen, is the intensive care version of M&A. In this case, there's little knowledge transfer, there's little benefit from knowledge transfer, and the acquired firm's need for autonomy is very, very low. In this case, there's unfortunately little to be gained, and we've basically acquired a firm probably in a bad way, and we want to avoid contamination from any integration that can occur. So what we'll do in this case is impose on the acquired firm some very strict turnaround targets for them to straighten up their act. Okay, now we'll move on towards strategic alliances. So companies often work together in the form of what's called a strategic alliance, and this involves collaboration with all or sometimes just parts of an organization. They don't need to merge or acquire one another. And this is what's called a strategic alliance, where we share resources and activities to pursue a common strategy. And as I mentioned before, this can be either with or without equity. We can have a JV, or we can have a strategic alliance where we work together, we collaborate, and create an offer. On average, corporations are managing about 30 alliances at any given time. It's a very common thing in an organization. Companies that do manage alliances must understand the role and the difficulty of focusing on collective success. I mean, you can't work as if the other organization wasn't there. There's a high degree of interdependence in strategic alliances. Sometimes the alliances actually compete against each other, and winning relies on creating this collaborative advantage, being able to work with your alliance partners. So effective alliances require that we're able to manage a network of people and build that network and develop tight links with network members. And that's the hallmark of a very good alliance. Now, there's various motives for building an alliance, and we can quickly run through some of these. We can have scale alliances where organizations combine in order to achieve necessary scale. This can provide us, for example, economies of scale in production. It can also provide us economies of scale in terms of inputs. If we're larger because we've made an alliance, we can actually maybe negotiate better our inputs. And that's the first motive for an alliance. So it basically gives us lower costs or bargaining power. The second motive would be access. We often ally in order to access capabilities of another organization. In this simple example, here we've got company A that's allied with company B to maybe access the distribution channel to distribute its outputs. This can go the other way. Company B may say, hey, I need to ally with company A to get the required inputs that I need to produce the outputs for the market that I'm trying to serve. We can also have a complementary alliance where companies will ally with another company to complement their lack of resources or capabilities in one part of their value chain, for example. So we work together. A will provide B with something it doesn't have, and B will provide A with something it doesn't have. And these are what can be referred to as complementary alliances, where we combine distinctive resources to help fill the gap that exists in the other organization. And lastly, we can have collusive alliances, where we basically collude together to increase our market power, to better negotiate inputs, to increase prices for our customers, and whatnot. And now we've spoken about this in the past. Collusion in the form of cartel is strictly illegal in most countries. And if you're going to do it, if companies do it, they keep it very, very secret. Most regulations and laws prohibit this type of activity by firms. So to make the choice, we can look at basically 4 criteria. So we're going to choose between buying or acquiring, making an alliance, or just doing it ourselves through organic development and growth. So here are some factors to consider. The first being the urgency. Acquisitions are a rapid method for pursuing a strategy, and alliances can also be relatively fast. Doing it yourself and growing organically can take a long time because everything needs to be done from scratch. You can buy the skills and resources you need, and this allows you to go very fast. So if urgency is critical, an M&A or alliance is a potential opportunity. Secondly, uncertain. It's often better to choose the alliance route, which is we see here, where there is high uncertainty in terms of markets or technologies. If things work out, if the uncertainty works out, well, maybe you can put an option in to buy your alliance partner. If things don't work out, well, you share the losses and you call it a day. Uncertainty for do-it-yourself, if you invest money into some sort of activity and it doesn't work out, you really can't sell something. If you acquire a company, and this is why this is kind of yellow color here, if you acquire a company, what you could eventually do is eventually sell the failure. Now that can be tough, but if you acquire a company and you're under high uncertainty and it doesn't work out, you could eventually sell the acquired organization. If you invest, as I said, in your own organization developing skills, you can't just sell yourself. And so the best option here is probably a lie. You can manage the risk the best way. If it doesn't work out, there's a lot of risk and uncertainty, and you make an alliance and it doesn't work out, well, everybody, takes on some of the risk, takes on some of the cost, and you go your separate ways at the end of the day. If it does work out, and you've made a bet, if you will, on something working out, and the uncertainty goes away, and you make a super deal, well, you may want to, in the end say, okay, maybe I'll acquire the company that I just had this alliance with. So it leaves a lot of doors open. The third factor to consider would be the capabilities being used or acquired. If we're acquiring hard resources, production units, acquisitions can work. However, if we're focusing on soft capabilities and people issues and cultures and soft issues, well, doing it yourself is best, because as we develop, we're being consistent with our own culture. If we buy a company, the culture can have significant issues in terms of the valuation of the acquisition. So when we're back negotiating, this is going to come in and say, well, the cultures don't match. If we make an alliance, well, we really can't control the organization's resources very well, and that creates another problem. Overall, soft capabilities, if it's an issue for the M&A or for your choice, you'd probably want to go with organic growth, definitely, because it's consistent with your organization culture. And lastly, the modularity of capabilities in the organization. In terms of modularity, if the skills, if the capabilities and resources you're looking to develop or acquire exist in part of the organization, and the organization is modular in nature, an alliance is really nice here, because you can ally with just the relevant part of the organization that you need to work with. Buying a company to have access to just part of its capabilities doesn't make a lot of sense. And doing it yourself, you could do it if it's looking at certain types of innovative capabilities and whatnot. You can also do this in a new venture unit and grow these capabilities yourself over time. But modularity of capabilities, if you can say, hey, we can keep these competencies apart from the main organization, great, launch a new venture unit. If you can acquire through an alliance access to parts of an organization, then alliance is definitely the best way to go. But if you're only interested in part of the acquisition target and the competencies in part of the company, acquiring the whole company just to get access to a little bit of it, unless, of course, for some reason the valuation is super, super low, it doesn't make sense. So we've gone through some of the basics of what is a merger, what is acquisition, and what is an alliance. You've seen, hopefully, the reasons for mergers and acquisitions. You've seen some of the challenges of mergers and acquisitions. And if you have any questions about M&As or alliances, please don't hesitate to contact me. Have a good day, and see you next time.